Advisory Council of the Illinois State Board of Education. It's a tremendous experience. But I said, young man, you live in the deep southern part of Illinois. The kids you're going to meet will make you live on another planet. When you start comparing what your opportunities are versus what theirs are, it will just be like two different states. And in some ways, you are. So this gets at that. This says, hey, let's give the poorest people, the poorest districts, the bump on the bottom. Let's give a little bit of a haircut on the top, contain the cost some, and that will work for the system. And it helps us through that money quicker, those downstate, those poorest districts, as we run through the years forward. Just a mathematical adjustment. School funding components, local capacity calculations. SB1 reflects that local funds, what reflects local funds districts can access. The governor's AB, this is maybe one of the most stunning parts of the AB. It says all property wealth is included even if districts can't access it. You might be saying, what does that even mean? You've heard of PTEL, the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law. It's in several counties across Illinois. It's meant to suppress the amount of taxes that can be accessed by taxing districts, schools being one of them. You've also probably heard of TIFs, Tax Increment Financing Districts. It's an economic development tool that businesses partner with counties and cities to implement to lure businesses and job growth in their area. We have TIF districts and PTEL districts all across Illinois. If you look at the map, the orange districts here are affected by PTEL and TIF. Okay, if you're a opaque colored school district, you're not affected by PTEL or TIF. This affects almost every legislative district there is. Okay? You've got something in here that's being affected negatively. Here's what that means. It simply says, hey, you have to count the value of the money inside the TIF and the PTEL area as if you were collecting it. Okay? It basically means you artificially submit a report that says you're wealthier than you are. And when you do that, if you artificially look wealthier than you are, guess what happens on the state side? You have access to less state money. Okay? This is a hoax. In its simplest terms, it's a hoax. And it probably was the biggest shocker because in the ad nauseum hours that went into developing this wasn't brought up a single time. But yet it came out of the veto message as a major component. This just cannot stand. It destroys and creates districts that are losers across the state by artificially inflating their local wealth, which they can never access according to state law. So, Chicago. Ever been to Chicago? I remember as a kid, I'd never been. I remember my first time, I was scared to death. I was glad to get home. Anymore, I'm up there too often, and I'm always glad to get home. In Illinois, politically, the oldest trick in the book is to go downtown Chicago, talk to people in Chicago, point your finger south, and talk about all those farmers downstate that are taking all their tax money and sending it down here to support our schools and support our programs. The balance of that trick is to come downstate, point north, and say, that Chicago is getting a bailout. You ever heard that phrase, the Chicago bailout? That's the oldest political trick you can pull. That creates a visceral reaction in downstate people, and it creates a visceral reaction when you're standing on LaSalle Street among bankers and lawyers thinking, yeah, you're right, my money is going downstate to all those farmers. There's probably not a predominant amount of farmers here tonight, is my guess. But there are farmers in downstate Illinois. We grow as much corn and beans as anybody in the world. But that's how this game is played. It's downstate taking it away when you're talking in Chicago, and when you're downstate in Chicago, taking your taxes and going up there and bailing out the worst system in the world. Not that it is, but it's often tagged that way. So here's how we treated this. See, SB1 sunsets the CPS block grant. What is the CPS block grant? In 1995, Mayor Daley came to Springfield and said, hey, Chicago schools are quite a mess. I'm the mayor. I want to take them on. I want to improve these schools, but I need some extraordinary powers as mayor to do this, more so than normal school districts have. I want to be able to appoint the board. I want to be able to help pick the superintendent. I want to be able to have a levy to levy for our taxes, to pay our pensions. and I want some strings attached in terms of mandates and manager rights for Chicago to do things differently. We have 400,000 kids. No other school district is even comparable to that. Elgin has 40,000, that's 1/10 of what Chicago has, so he makes the deal. The deal occurs, it's been in place for 22 years, up through this moment. That block grant represents what superintendents and school board members talk about as MCAT payments. Mandated MCAT payments are money that gets reimbursed to school districts for services that they have delivered to kids. It may be transportation, it may be special education, it may be free breakfast and lunch. But it's a reimbursement of services that school districts have delivered to kids. In the block grant, at that time, they made a deal that they just got 30% of the block grant based on their entire population. The rest of the state got in line, made claims, and got reimbursed. And that used to work until just a few years ago when we started shorting it. So the block grant has worked reasonably well for several years. When we were building SB1, the evidence-based model, we went round and round and round about the block grant. How do we treat it? Do we try to remove it? Do we leave it in? Because one of the core principles early on was no district loses money. Well, when we started to run the model, we realized if we removed the block grant, we would be taking dollars out of their classrooms in Chicago and putting it somewhere else. So we made the decision twofold. One, we can't do it mathematically because they'll lose money. Number two, politically, you can't pass a bill in the Illinois General Assembly that's of this deep and broad of public policy impact that negatively affects 400,000 kids. Here's the political count. Somebody write this down. How many members are in the House of Representatives in Illinois? Give you a guess. Brent Clark's number is 118. 118. That's how many. He's the furthest over there in the corner. There's 118 House members. 51 of them are Republicans. 32 of them are downstate Democrats. That means even if you're in Lake County, which sits north of Chicago, you're considered a downstate Democrat because you're not in Chicago. 35 are in Chicago. 35 Democrats that work in the legislature are in Chicago. So when you walk into the General Assembly with a bill to pass, if you think you're going to harm 400,000 kids that have 35 representatives sitting in the House of Representatives with your bill, you've got about 10 seconds to make your introductions and find the back door. It's never going to work. Not in today's population and demographics around Illinois. So you have to recognize, we have to recognize, there's an important number of people that sit in the House that represent the city of Chicago. Downstate, a superintendent may be one of 10 or 15 superintendents that a state representative works with in their representative area. In Chicago, when you're the superintendent, you have 35 representatives that sort of work with you. Think about that, how opposite that is, okay? So we decided there's no way you can do this. It fails on the math, it fails on the politics. We left the block grant in the evidence-based model. The governor's veto takes it out, creating a loser. Number two, evidence-based model, SB1, recognizes that CPS has to pay the unfunded liability on its pensions. Okay, this gets a little tricky, but bear with it. Remember in 1995 when the mayor came down and made the deal, said, hey, we want to levy for our pensions and manage our own stuff? Well, they've had the chance to do that, and they've mismanaged it slightly better than the state of Illinois is. Ours is grossly mismanaged. Theirs is mismanaged, okay, on a scale. I think we're around 39 or 40% funded in TRS, Teachers Retirement System. The Chicago teacher system is roughly around 50% funded. So they haven't done a great job, and of course the downstate system hasn't done a great job either. They're the only system, the only school system in all of Illinois, about the 852 systems, that carries their own pension payments and their own pension liability. For all the other 851 districts, the state of Illinois, since the inception of the cost of paying for pensions, has said we'll pay that cost. The state of Illinois pays the cost for all the districts. They carry the cost and they carry the liability. You say, wait a minute, I'm a teacher, I pay 9%. Yes, you you do. But the state of Illinois is kicking in $900 million a year in annual recurring costs, plus the unfunded liability that they have to carry for all their mismanagement techniques that they've employed upon us over the last 50 years. Okay, here's the example. You have a home